don't be me. You know what I mean? Like, don't let that fall to the side, because it's just such amazing recurring revenue. I think, musicians are especially because like music takes so long to produce. We talk so much about merch on this podcast because that is what's going to give you recurring revenue. And so to just kind of breeze over the idea of membership is really just not a great idea. We really did need to spend some time talking about membership.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I am your host, Corinne, and Jack is here as well. And we have no plan today.
None. No plan whatsoever.
No plans. As much as we lecture about you need to have a plan and, make sure all your stuff is ready, we didn't. No. I was telling Jack before we started recording, we've been doing a lot of arcs lately. And, I like to present that because then over time, you can kind of think about things and develop over a few episodes, a few weeks, right? And you can bite off those little chunks. But sometimes we just need to chat about things that are happening. And, something that is prevalent in my mind right now is membership stuff, which I know we've talked about membership stuff. And we've drawn some hard lines in the sand about membership. And recently my thinking of it has kind of changed a little. So I guess I just wanted to come and talk about it. And Jack, you have people who are running memberships as well, yeah?
We do, yeah. At IndieX, there's a number of different clients that are running memberships of some kind, whether it be, something as small as a 1-tier kind of membership, or, larger, more built out things on Patreon, or even, self-hosted membership sites that are built into their website or something like that.
Right.
We've seen kind of a wide variety of different membership opportunities going on, and even things like apps. So yeah, a lot of cool stuff to talk about. And it seems like that landscape is always evolving, and my mind is always kind of turning as I see artists get creative with what they do. Kind of always exceeding my expectations of what might be possible. So yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because if you've been listening to this podcast for any period of time, especially a long period of time, I have drug my feet on developing out my membership. I don't know why, but it was the one. There are two things that I am extremely guilty of not actually complying with the entrepreneur way. And one of them is video, right? I am terrible at video, and I don't do consistent live streams. And it's just one of those things where do as I say, not as I do, right? Like if you go to my IG, I don't even know the last time I posted. It literally might've been 9 months ago. You know what I mean? And I do mostly stories, but I don't go live often. So that's one thing, right? I'm just calling out my stuff here, man. I'm just being honest.
If we're this is a good platform for us to just kind of pick at ourselves and everybody else on what we see. Why not?
Yeah. Well, and I think as much as I talk about on this podcast, a lot of it I'm doing actively for my stuff. But I think it's, something that comes up in the group a lot, and, even in conversations on Twitter and stuff, are just, people being like, how are you doing all this? And it's like, I'm not doing all of it, and I don't want to come in here and try to represent that I'm doing all the things. And so my membership is the other thing that I've not pursued in the way I think I should have in the past, ever, right? As much as I nurture my people and, personalize their customer experience when they order from me, and I'm always putting all of these personal touches in there, and that's great. And there's I have a Facebook group, there's a community in there, and it's like, why have I not been monetizing. There's enough people, right? There's enough people signed up to, get better features and do all this other stuff. So I thought it'd be good if we came live, to talk about my fault, like what my, possible blockers are on that mentally and technically. And then maybe talk about, if you're struggling, maybe that'll help you. And if you're not struggling and you have a membership and you're doing well with it, hopefully, we can give you some insights into how to make it better, because even though I'm not executing it, I know what I would like. And Jack has a ton of insight into that as well.
Totally. Yeah. I think that's a great place to start. Let's start with a little expose of where you're at, Corinne. What is
how Corinne sucks.
Yeah, where is your membership? Or rather, where isn't your membership? Where did you envision it going, and what is blocking you? A little membership stand up going on here. What's blocking you?
Yeah, well, it's funny because for a while I was like, Patreon, like that seems like a really good option. And, we have trouble with Patreon because of the data dark spot that lies in it, and then, so I was like, well, I shouldn't do that. Right. And I was just like, nope, I'm not doing it. Like the right way is to build Indie Pro, but for Corinne Campbell, and so for a while I did that. I was in WordPress, and I got a SiteGround, annual thing, and bought all the plugins and got in there. And I was just like, man, this is hard. So then I went over to Squarespace and was using MemberSpace and building things out in there. And I was like, I don't really have control over the features I want to make this really cool. And then now I'm back on WordPress and I'm building things out in WordPress. And I'm getting more and more experience in WordPress, and I'm using Thrive themes and MemberMouse, which is the same tech stack that this site, the Indie Pro site is built on, not for long, but with a new site coming out soon. But it's what it's built on right now. And so I'm a little bit more familiar with these plugins, although Circus still had to help me lately with some hacks for little bugs that when I just couldn't figure out why things were looking funny on mobile and stuff like that. But yeah, I think it's really been, the biggest challenge has been deciding like what features, how many tiers, what comes with what kind of membership, how do I drip this content out, or do I offer things early, or, I think there was just too many ideas, right?
Yeah.
And not really knowing how I was going to deliver them. And I think that's probably what a lot of musicians struggle with. And yeah, so I would say that has been kind of the saga for me.
It's definitely I think that's definitely like a big hurdle to overcome. Like the idea fairy comes in and waves its magic wand, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I could build a membership site with all of these things, and I need all of this, different pieces of tech to do all the things that I want to do. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, but if I want to do all the things, I'm going to have to fulfill on all the things. How am I going to make that work? What is that going to look like? It can be really, really overwhelming.
Right.
So I empathize with where you're at for sure.
Yeah. Well, I used to struggle with like email ideas, right? And I know a lot of indies struggle with email ideas. Like, what do I just keep emailing them, And over time, I've started to get more comfortable with that, right? I email them consistently, even if it's just freaking say hi, right? And to, talk to them and ask them for replies, or send them a fun little game in ManyChat, or, you know what I mean? Like just little things.
Yeah.
And then when there's an offer mixed in there, great, And so that has been getting easier and easier. But then it's like, if I do a membership, like, whoa, there's so much higher expectations, because at that point people are paying you. You can't just be like, well, I just need to stay in touch. Like, there's a lot more that comes with that. And so, yeah, so I think that that's where it's great to get some insight on, you're working on several artist stuff who are running membership sites successfully. And so I think the point of this podcast with no plan is to basically demonstrate like these are things that are difficult. And if you're struggling figuring out how to do membership, like that's okay, right? You're not like a crappy artist. And you know what I mean? It's just because of that. So hopefully Jack especially can give some insight into, different things you can develop and all of that stuff. So yeah, let's start jamming on it. I mean, I think one thing that would be good to start with is tech stack, right?
For sure. Yeah. Tech stack is like, for most indies who probably look at like, even have the idea in their mind of like, I want to build a membership. The first thing they probably do is like, they go on Google and they look for membership site options. That's probably where the tech stack search starts. So yeah, let's start there.
Okay. Well, obviously I've done my fair jumping around of different ideas of tech stack. And I think, there's this mix of, ease of use. And then it's like, well, if I make this investment into this huge, endeavor, my time and money, like if I don't have projected number of members, especially like for grassroots artists, if you only have like 10 to 20 diehards who are thinking of joining this membership, it can be really difficult to build, say like, okay, I need to build out all these tiers. I need to build this website and, build it and they will come, And so if you look at where I've jumped around, it's definitely gone from ease of use to perfect business model, back to ease of use, a little bit harder, but still ease of use. And then all the way to the other side of the spectrum again. And I'm committed this time, but I think that really kind of illustrates the struggle that a lot of indies have, right? Is like, okay, my time is valuable, my money is valuable, and, what can I reasonably accomplish? And if you're getting to that paralysis of choice, I would guess that that's the two biggest elements that indies struggle with when trying to get this knocked out.
Yeah, definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head, especially when you mention like, a grassroots indie who maybe has 10, 15, 20 diehards, and that's kind of where they know their ascension customers might be who would be interested in something like a membership. The tech hangups are almost like looming right after that realization comes of like, okay, like I know I want to do this and I know I have a handful of people who are right, but where is the right place to get them to hang out? Based on what I know about my people. I think a good question to ask yourself if you're in that position is, if you were to boil down your membership to say like minimum viable product, you had one core thing that you wanted your membership to do, like across all tiers, you knew that like if you were pitching it to somebody, the one idea would be like, for example, a place for us to hang out and for you to hear from me before anyone else. Like, let's say like it's a place for us to hang out together and for you to hear my music first. It's taking that priority access and VIP status kind of angle. If that was your, big promise of your membership and everything else, every tier, perk and benefit was all kind of built around that or in addition to that, looking into the tech that would allow you to do that is kind of the first place that I would look. That doesn't necessarily narrow it down a little bit, but it might give you some clarity. It might give you some clarity on, what that platform might be, at least a little bit, or at least the features that you would need to look into.
Yeah. So let's start with the first option I looked at, right? Most ease of use is probably Patreon. One thing that I've definitely taken a hard stance on no for Patreon because of their, lack of Facebook pixel integration, which I feel like is just a huge oversight. I don't know why that's still not something that they've developed. and something they've enabled. But, you know, I've said that in the past where I'm like, nope, no Pixel, not a perfect world. I'm out of there. And I do think that there are other easy solutions that compete with Patreon, but nothing is going to be as out the box as Patreon.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think if you are at a point where you're grassroots, you feel like you're going to maybe start with a dozen members, right? I've changed my position on that. You know, I think that there are different ways, you know, just like Spotify is a dark zone. And the thing about Spotify, and the reason why I don't prioritize Spotify, even if I can put a bridge page in front of it, is that on the other side of it is just not something that is valuable to me, you know, 0.03 of a cent or whatever. You know, and sure, that can grow into many things and whatever, but that isn't something that's worth just sacrificing that data for, you know, even if there's a bridge page. And however, with Patreon, you're talking about ascension, right? You're talking about people who have already purchased from you or are passionate about you, who are probably willing to tell their friends about you. And at that point, it's like, okay, is that sacrifice worth it? And in theory, those are people you want to be able to pixel even more. But at the same time, like if they land on a bridge page and there are these, you know, and then you send out posts that are just to those members that are paid, that are then hosting content on your site, like you can still find, you know, there's ways around that. So yeah, I've really shifted my perspective on Patreon. I feel like it's definitely something that's viable when you're just starting out, especially so you don't get arrested in feeling like, well, it's not perfect, so I can't use it. And I have to do this other huge thing that I don't have time to do.
Totally. Yeah. I think, you know, as an out of the box kind of solution, Patreon works really, really well. I've worked with a number of artists that use it, and they like it. I think the problems do lie in the tracking, for one, both in the tracking of like what's being consumed, how people are coming and going from your membership in Patreon, you know, how people are buying. Certainly, like running ads into it is super challenging from the tracking perspective. You really don't have any strong ability to track your returns. So
right,
that presents a really unique problem for sure. And I mean,
for
it doesn't
advertising, especially you would have to rely a lot on the organic communication with people and not know if your ads were doing well. So either you don't care about the ROAS on that ad and you just have to kind of guess, or you don't run ads and you do other things and then offer the membership, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, for a lot of artists that are on Patreon, that we've worked with, that is kind of the recommendation that we've made, is like, well, you're not going to run cold traffic to your Patreon. That's for sure. You know, like these people don't even know who you are. Why would they want to sign up for your membership site? So like that does kind of remove that issue at least a little bit. But for your warm traffic, especially like your higher segmented LTV audiences and things like that, you do somewhat lose the ability to track return on ad spend effectively. So when we've run traffic into Patreon for warm audiences, it has been really, really tight kind of budget, looking at small time windows of time, you know, making sure that like kind of doing as much legwork as we can to at least get some sense of what's happening on the back end and keep track of it so that we're not just throwing money into the trash.
Yeah, exactly. So for you, what is like what are kind of subscriber thresholds for you where you start doing things differently? Do you have some kind of, for Patreon specifically, you know, is there a specific time that you're like, okay, we've hit this many members, or at this many members, we build the tier? Like, do you have any recommendations as far as where that's concerned?
You know, that's such a good question. And that honestly hasn't come up all that much, at least at IndieX, where it's been looking at someone's Patreon and saying like, you should definitively move. In most cases that we've migrated an artist off of Patreon, it's because they wanted more they specifically came to me or whoever and specifically wanted more granular control over, what tiers see certain things, what it's branded to look like. And it's really been around like the visual representation of their site, their membership platform, than it has been like me kind of prodding them to be like, okay, time to get off.
Right.
Coincidentally, it's all usually worked out pretty. I will say this, it's worked out really well in time, typically with them wanting to expand the offerings. I'm thinking of one band in particular that when they came on board at IndieX, they were working with a Patreon site that was just like you paid per content. So anytime they dropped a piece of content, the people would pay for that. So it wasn't based on a monthly model. And they were looking to build a monthly model, and we're trying to figure out the right way to do it. So they kind of were having an overhaul on what their membership offering was going to look like altogether. So it was a natural transition to say, okay, well, if you want to do something like that and you're at this stage of growth in your career, it might be worth looking into moving on to a dedicated platform that you build and that you own. So that was one example. The other example was another one of our IndieX artists who was on Patreon and was looking to do more with the tiers that he was offering, but also he more heavily wanted to be able to brand it and have it be, kind of like a place where everybody could hang out and communicate with each other with dedicated chats and comment sections and things like that. And really have it be a very in-depth kind of visual experience. So again, that was more of like a features kind of move that he was looking for and was like, okay, does it make sense to do this right now?
Right. Yeah, that totally makes sense.
It's never really been a threshold of subscribers. In most cases, actually, it's been, I don't even want to say a threshold of features, more of like a desire for deeper customization than would have been possible, even if that was, months in the future. If an artist says to me, like, I know I want to do this in a year and make it really cool for my fans, and they have this big grand vision, and it's like, okay, well, like, you're not going to be able to do that on your Patreon site or whatever, then, at that point it's worth looking at, making a move to something else.
Sure. I mean, I do think there's a consideration there. I think it's so easy to get snagged, and this applies in all kind of places, not just in membership, but it's always easier in my mind to do it the right way first, like from the get. And migrating from Mailchimp to Drip, I was like, holy, I was not happy about it. It was not a pleasant experience. And I love Drip, and I'm very happy that I made that switch. But I was like, man, if only this had existed when I started, because there is a certain amount of data that I lost, right? Like how long they've been on the list. I still have that data and I have it saved in a custom field, but it doesn't apply in the ways that, Drip is great because you can email people after a certain period of time on your list and checking out the churn and all of that, those features are lost and you're kind of starting over. And so the same would be true, changing over from Patreon, and same is true with website stuff. And, there's all kinds of things, but I feel like in some cases you have to look at the reasonable amount of time it would take you, risk versus reward essentially, but instead it's time versus reward. And so, I do think that there are situations in which Patreon can make sense. And there are, plenty of people on Patreon, especially if you're doing a as delivery, charge for content as it's actually presented. I think that's a business model that makes sense, to keep on Patreon longer. I know,
agree,
with live chats, at least the last time I was in Patreon, which has been a hot minute, I was working with an artist who had a very successful Patreon, and they were making more from Patreon than anything else in their music. And, when they had like private live chats, they had to point people elsewhere, and it wasn't even something they could do on Patreon. And so they were using YouTube unlisted links, and those are shareable, so they had some trouble actually gating their stuff that way. Like a couple of friends would be like, all right, one of us is going to pay for the Patreon and the other is going to share the content.
Yeah. Yep.
And so that, there are some limitations, but I think if you're starting out and the only thing keeping you from launching it, like you feel like you'll for sure have 10 people sign up, I think it could be worth it to just try it out on Patreon, test out the business model. Maybe don't stay there forever, but, at least it gets you off your butt.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Super valuable, because then you feel motivated, right? Once you see those 10 people, you're like, oh yeah, and maybe it energizes you to take on a more complicated project, So
yeah, absolutely. I think there is some consideration to make about what you mentioned about like a subscriber threshold. If you're working with a Patreon of like thousands and thousands of members, and you do want to do something like have a custom build, build something on WordPress or with MemberMouse or something like that.
Right.
It does present a significant challenge to get people to move over. And that is something that I've seen, that's a big hurdle. It's asking people to move from something that they're comfortable with. I've often seen it that like, there's people who are just, monthly supporting you and, really not engaging with the content. I've seen plenty of artists that have those people that are just like, oh yeah, like I'll give them $5 every month, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, and they're not really,
even Indie
they're not
Pro
really
is
there.
that way. We have people who pay every month and they don't log in. And we're not just going to shut off their account, because if they want to use it all of a sudden, we don't want to have restricted their access. Or it's like a gym membership, right? Raise your hand if you've had a gym membership for 7 years and don't go nearly as often as you should to get the value out of that.
I didn't know that we were creating the Creative Shame podcast.
Oh, every day for me is creative shame, friend.
So good.
All I have to do is go through my voice memos of song ideas and I've got creative shame.
Oh, me too.
But yeah, I mean, so I think that there's a lot of things that people would just pay for. And you could very easily lose those people, over time and through that changeover. So yeah, I mean, I think there are things definitely to consider. But I'm here to say basically, like, if you feel like the project of building something is what's keeping you from doing it, then just go for something easy like Patreon,
Definitely. Yeah.
But
I agree.
If you feel like you've got a vision of a lot of followers doing this right out the gate, you might want to take on that bigger challenge.
I think if I could, I hate to be boilerplate about this, but like this just came to my head. Like if an artist came to me and was like, hey, consult with me for an hour on how I should ideate, my first dipping my toes into a membership site. I've got some fans that I think are interested in something like that. What might that look like? I think if I were in their shoes, what I would probably do is I would conduct a customer research survey with those people that are going to be most likely to be into something like that. Ideally, it's a relatively small sample, and I would find out what they dig, what they would want, what interests them about this idea. And I'd probably start there, pulling out ideas from them, using that research to get copy points and sales bullet points and things like that, really trying to dig into the customer's wants and needs. And what they don't get from other artists that they're into. I think that's important too. You can give yourself a little bit of a competitive edge if you find out what your fans are lacking from other people.
Right.
Nobody talks about that, but they should.
Yeah, for sure.
Start there and then build out like a minimum viable product in Patreon, 2 tiers, 3 tiers. Start there, present it to those people, that cohort that you interviewed and surveyed, present it to them, see if you can get a few on board and kind of use that to create the skeleton. And then what you might find, I would start there. I think that would be like the roadmap. And then what you might find is then by having that opens the ideas up to your, more grand vision that you could then start planning to create and build in a platform if you need, a WordPress platform or whatever, if you needed to. Yeah. That would probably be like the roadmap that I would recommend.
Yeah. I think that's smart. And one other thing too, when I've been speaking to different artists about their membership sites, and something that I've considered for myself, like, and some of you may be very familiar with this, and so don't let me insult your intelligence, but, MVP, right? Minimum viable product. Yes. And that's something we look at, it's obviously, it's a term used in business quite a bit. And we've obviously talked about it on here, but really think about that term, right? Even if you knew what it meant already, minimum viable, right? What would I need to offer at minimum? There are probably people that would just be like, look, I want to support you. I've had people message me that plenty of times. It's like, look, do you have a Patreon? I'll just throw you money. I don't even need anything. I just love what you're doing and I want to support what you're doing. And that's exactly the kind of person that is, interested in your stuff. So if you're building out a minimum viable product, say you start something at $5 a month, right? People can just give you $5 a month and feel good supporting you. And you give them just like a little bit of effort, chances are people are going to be down with that. It's only $5, So you don't have to set the expectation super duper high. It's also, I think, really valuable to not think like, okay, this is my perfect vision of a membership site. And so that's what I need to do. Like, just think about, okay. And actually I was working with Gracie, in her PD, she's, developing her membership out. And I was like, well, look at what you would want, like everything that you can imagine in a membership site, aside from like sending people transformers that turn into you or something. Like, obviously that's like way, don't think of that far.
Sounds amazing.
Dude, I would love that. But, think about it that way. Think about, okay, what would the range of features if all I had to do was live off of this? If I was not a YouTuber, but essentially a YouTuber where the only thing I had to do, like this paid my bills, this gave me enough income to live off of it, right? What could you do if it was a full-time gig? And then segment that down. And like, what would I have to charge, that many people to make that? How many members would I need at this price to live? And then, what would those features look like? And then kind of scale it down and think about what those tiers could look like. Because if you build out a $5 membership that has all of these features that you wanted, or even if you build out a $25 feature that you feel like is the ceiling of what you can do, because you want people to be able to give you more money, that there's a fall to that, because then if you want to build out more tiers, there's a point where, like, how far can you go? How much time is really viable for you? And you want to always think about, the minimum viable product versus the optimal product as far as your imagination can think right now. And then once you break that down and you look at that first one, like, could I do this first one? And it's like, I could totally do that, So I think, if you break it down that way, it can be really great, not only just to brainstorm those features, but also to realize, like, how little you really have to do to get this to go,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where, like you were saying, once you start thinking about a minimum viable product and then considering what might be the optimal product, that's where you can start to look into additional tech stack things that you might need to have, or, choosing a path that's right for you.
Right.
We talked about Patreon. Obviously, we've probably talked on the podcast before about MemberMouse, which is a WordPress plugin or a suite in WordPress that you can use for building sites. It's pretty powerful. A lot of the membership sites that we work with different artists are built in WordPress with MemberMouse as the back end, which is pretty powerful. So that's one other option. What else were you looking at, Corinne?
Well, and currently we have a deal in the Indie Pro deals, right? The Indie Pro, if you didn't know,
yes,
Indie Pro has indie deals where we've negotiated. We don't get affiliate income from it. We've negotiated lower pricing for our indies in lieu of affiliate revenue. And so for us, some of those deals are lower than any deal you're going to find out there. And one of the great deals that we have is with MemberSpace, which is, they're a great company. They work, their plugin works on multiples, even though it sounds like specifically a Squarespace plugin. It works with HTML5. It works with WordPress. It works with Wix. And basically it gates your content. So basically you put in the URLs and you decide which membership levels have access to that page, and you can gate it with a login. And it's very easy to use. And I think it's like with our discount, I think it's 20% off, and they're like $25 or $30 a month, which is, really reasonable, especially since everything else that you're using for your site and maybe for your store, if you're using internal e-com on your site, it's really not a huge added cost as long as you can make that $30 back, right? So like that was something that that's something that's, I think, a really viable situation where like you're literally building pages exactly the way you would for your site. You're not having to do it any differently because you're already familiar with that builder, and then you just gate the URLs. So I think that's a really, if you don't want to go as easy as Patreon, but you want to go the next level, I think that's great. There are some limitations, right? Like, offering products or, shipping things to people that might get a little more complicated, but at the same time, you could still just use a URL gate to keep people who don't have that membership level from accessing like the checkout page for that or the shipping information for that. So yeah, I think that there's, that's a pretty good option for someone who doesn't want to learn WordPress right now, but wants to be able to get people in there.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I mean, it sounds like it kind of is wide reaching. I personally haven't used it. But it sounds like something that I would really like.
Yeah.
Just because of how, expansive it is in terms of what it integrates with. That's super dope.
Yeah. I mean, I think and it's really customizable, but you do need some knowledge of CSS, or at least like check out a YouTube tutorial, right? It's not like deep
Right.
CSS, but you do need to use a little bit to get it to totally style. But it's 100% brandable. It doesn't, like you don't have to worry about it having a different website look, right? It can look exactly like your stuff. It's just some code that you insert on a page. So basically anything that allows you to install HTML code on your site. And obviously I can't list all the range of website builders that do that. There are some that, it's limited, but basically anything like that, you'll be able to use it. So I think that's a really good intermediate option, or even it's not even intermediate, it's closer to beginner than it is to intermediate in my mind.
That's great. That's super awesome. And I think, one thing that you mentioned about like shipping and including products and how that involves some hoop jumping, I think for a lot of different membership platforms, and certainly for MemberMouse, there is additional integrations that need to be built when you want to do things like, have a shirt that gets sent with a certain membership tier,
right, yeah.
Or like a product offering. All of that is like kind of the norm, at least from what I've seen. That, when you get more into the weeds with that sort of creative stuff, the tech integrations that you have to do, they get more cumbersome.
Right.
Involve Zapier, involve your store.
Right.
If you're doing any on-demand stuff, which, I've seen people do, that just opens up a whole different Pandora's box. It can get really, really complicated.
Yeah, for sure. So, picking a tech stack that's as native to, your own, or at least is advanced enough to be able to hook into your site builder and everything like that, I think is a really good way to, basically keep yourself from having to like rebuild your entire site around this whole thing,
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. Like that's pretty key to not driving yourself crazy.
Right. Yeah.
When wanting to build one of these sites is like, find something that's at least orbiting what you already use,
Right. Yeah, totally. So, so going to the next level, MemberMouse on WordPress it's pretty easy to use. I mean, I think that there are some, it doesn't integrate with some things natively. It requires a lot of basically push notifications that, may alert either Zapier or certain things like, MemberMouse doesn't integrate natively with, I think they only integrate with ActiveCampaign, Mailchimp, and maybe Constant Contact. And that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So trust me, I looked at so many different platforms for mine, and the fitness site that I mentioned a couple weeks ago, Strengthly Collective. I'm helping them build out their site, and I looked at a lot of different options, especially because they're expecting to launch with a lot of users. They already have a lot of activity, so I was looking at all kinds of things that may suit their needs, and so I was looking at MemberMouse, I was looking at MemberPress. I was looking at, I looked at so many different managers, and even though we ended up using MemberMouse, partially just because my familiarity with it, and it did serve their purposes better for the kind of product and access they were offering, I actually really dug MemberPress. It really links up with a lot of integrations. And it's one of the most popular out there for WordPress. Very easy to use, really user-friendly, more so than MemberMouse, in my opinion.
Yeah, I personally haven't used MemberPress, but I've heard much of the same.
Yeah.
Kind of just around the block, like very popular, very easy to integrate. So definitely an option on the more, advanced or feature-heavy kind of platform.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, I mean, whichever range of these things, and I know a lot of indies are working on WordPress, and so this is something that, again, you're already building pages and posts on WordPress. You already know how this works, right? So adding MemberMouse is not necessarily a big deal. Obviously, especially with those like higher level memberships providers, they have built-in checkout, which hook up to your PayPal, your Stripe, right? So you don't have to worry necessarily about if you're using a WordPress site but using a Shopify store, these providers have internal carts. So you don't have to integrate WooCommerce, right? You don't have to add that to your WordPress. There's a lot of different, you can, if you want, you can hook up WooCommerce in a lot of these situations. So, I think those are kind of the like three different levels. And I think that psychologically figuring out those tiers, figuring out the minimum viable product, right? And just starting small is really key to feeling like you need to get this off the ground. And honestly, if I weren't working on this fitness site, mine would have been launched by now. But this is the trials I've been going through for the last 2 years, And so I'm here to tell you that through the hard lessons I've learned in my struggles getting it launched, just start easy, right? And if you have 10 people that you think would be into it, do it. Don't do what I did and I have literally over 1,000 people sitting on my mailing list who have said, I'm interested. They've raised their hand specifically for the membership. And I've just been dragging my feet on bringing them a really great product. And like, don't be me. You know what I mean? Like, don't let that fall to the side, because it's just such amazing recurring revenue. I think, musicians are especially because like music takes so long to produce. We talk so much about merch on this podcast because that is what's going to give you recurring revenue. And so to just kind of breeze over the idea of membership is really just not a great idea. We really did need to spend some time talking about membership,
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're totally right about like just starting. There is some element of like taking imperfect action here. Like, not saying that you want to put like a crappy product out to your fans, but I think taking that approach of finding out who in your base is interested, getting them to raise their hands, maybe surveying them a little bit is a really good way to start. Put together an MVP, core kind of membership product, and then iterate on it from there. Something that, Corinne and I were talking about off the record before we started recording was the best membership sites that I see at IndieX are the ones that the artist is constantly iterating on and changing and making better for their members. Right. Those are the ones that, see decreased churn and more people signing up and net increases in members and, people just retaining throughout months and months and years. That's really where I think, that's where you can start getting into your perfectionism and making things cooler, is once you've got like the ship built and then you're just adding decorations to it and making it better. Adding different perks to membership. One artist in particular comes to mind who decided to last year for people in his $50 a month and up tiers. Dang. He was just like, I'm going to make them a t-shirt every month and just send it to them. Like, they love that.
Yeah. I'm
and
sure
he was like,
he
was like, I'm going to do that for a year. Like, it'll be a cool thing to do. And
Shirt
it is.
of the month, people.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great incentive, and I think it's a very different relationship. Again, like, we really should talk about this because merchandise is a totally different kind of purchase. It's a product kind of purchase, right? And they're doing it to support you. Obviously, they don't need a t-shirt. But there's more utilitarianism to it. Whereas, when you get into membership, it's more of a services thing. And they appreciate the service that you're giving them. So I think that it allows you to kind of segment your business into a different kind of section, right? And so if you're struggling with merch, as much as we've been talking about merch for the past few weeks, if you're struggling with merch, maybe you shift from products to services and have both of those present. Just start with that. Your MVP may become your MVP, most valuable player.
Ooh, well done. Nice pun.
Yeah. I pulled a Jack there. That was such a dad statement.
Very well done. Very well done. I approve.
Yeah, I figured.
I think that there's something to be said here for what membership can do to teach you and to help you sort of reverse engineer your buddy system as you go as well. Because the people that are supporting you on a monthly basis, especially at like higher tiers, they're the people that you can really lean on to help you ideate what's going on at the earlier stages of your business. Those are the people who you can say things like, if you were a new fan, would you like this?
Right.
And, almost survey them as if they were your board, or like your bench, to be able to say to them, hey, like, new fans are paying attention to our community, and you can speak to them as if it's a community that you're building. Totally. And say, new people are interested in us. Mm-hmm. What do you guys think about doing this to help get them into the fold? Right. That's where you can really you can make people feel like they're a part of something. You really make it about an experience and a community, like I said. And that's almost starts to put the seed in people's mind, for like referral and advocacy stage campaigns of the buddy system. If you start asking them, your members, like, oh, what do you think about this? Like, this offer that I'm putting together. Oh, I'm putting together, a t-shirt for new fans that I think that they might dig. Or for, the lower tiers of the membership, saying like, oh, hey, I was thinking about adding this perk for people that pay me, $2 a month. What do you guys think?
Right.
You can do that, which is cool. I don't think you can have that kind of relationship, at the earlier stages of your customer journey. So something to think about.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, making that kind of pivot to, if people are an early supporter or they're a high tiered supporter, they're going to give you feedback, right? So, having those, whether you're just starting out in your grassroots and you're taking on this small cohort, right? If they are the early adopters, they're going to be into having a discussion about this, right? In the same way, excuse my cat. In the same way, if you are talking about higher price tiers, they're also very invested in what happens, right? And so these are the very best people to ask about, what feature sets they would love to see, what kinds of, things they would love to see from you later on down the road. So you always want to give yourself headroom there, right? So that, they can ask for things. Otherwise, when you ask them, what do you think about this? Or, is there something you wish was in the site? They're going to be like, no, it's great.
It's perfect just the way it is. Don't do anything more. Exactly.
They may not be able to give you valuable feedback. So that's, definitely something for consideration, I think.
Yeah. 100%. There's almost this idea of like, you do want to have some element of like not giving away the farm right up front, like
right.
future pace your customers a little bit. And, software companies, especially software companies that are subscription based, not unlike Indie Pro, they do this all the time
right.
and so well.
Right.
They run their businesses on weeks and months, sprints, where they tell their customers like, hey, these are some of the things or the fixes or the features that we're adding. Be on the lookout for this.
Right.
Do that with your fans in your membership.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the biggest opportunities for you to treat your music business, somewhat like a software or like a service platform.
Right. And that combination of products and services, I think, is really the pinnacle of making some kind of, meaningful income, in your music. And maybe that allows you to quit your part-time. You know what I mean? So,
for sure.
If YouTubers can do it, musicians can do it. That's I'm just going to use 100%. Use that reference again, except it won't be ad dollars, which is even greater because you're not annoying people with ads about, joining whatever dumb club is asking them to join. So, or getting advertising from politicians, which is, it happened enough on me on YouTube where I went YouTube Premium just so I didn't have to see that bull.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Not that that's expensive, but so yeah, I mean, I hope that this has helped some of you kind of figure out the hurdles of figuring out how to foster these close communities, really give yourself some more recurring revenue and, setting that minimum expectation for yourself. Like you want to do great things for your fans, but at the same time, you need to be forgiving on yourself and give yourself headroom to grow. So just do the minimum thing. And if for you, that's a Patreon, just keep in mind that lack of tracking can really be mitigated by when you send this exclusive content to your people, send them to a page on your site that is not open to anyone else and pixel them there. There are ways to kind of figure that out, or use MemberSpace and put it on whatever platform you're using. Don't feel like, you need to learn a whole new builder. You just have to figure out MemberSpace, and they actually have really great documentation and tutorials. So you don't have to feel like you're just swimming around trying to figure it out. Or if you're on WordPress, put in one of these plugins. MemberPress is great. MemberMouse is great. Restrict Content Pro is another one that I've used.
That's another one
that is great. And they're not that expensive, So definitely, I hope that this helped some of you kind of figure out how you can get off your tail and start developing at least out the beginnings and be forgiving of yourself and just get it launched, because you're never going to know what you could possibly achieve if you don't start.
Absolutely. This is such a fun topic because I think like once you get over these hurdles and you just start to believe in the thing a little bit, it opens up the world of like, oh, there's so much I could do.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the creative juices really start flowing. No pun intended.
Dad joke.
Yeah, there you are. So I hope that we see a whole bunch of indies with membership sites, rolling into the new year. That would be super, super dope and certainly inspiring for us as well.
Right. And hopefully it would be inspiring for you. That's why even doing a minimum thing, once you see it working, you're going to be more motivated. So, well, great jam session, Jack. Considering you had no plan whatsoever, I feel happy.
Yeah, so much fun.
I feel happy with our discussion. So next week, we're going to be talking about something that I've been actually dreading for a good long while. We're going to talk about YouTube ads, which is what everybody wants us to talk about. And there are definitely some cool things about YouTube. We're going to have some tips on how you can use some YouTube ads to get more reviews, which isn't necessarily our highest priority. And we do have some case studies to share with you on what's worked, what's not worked for YouTube. And then, really that ties into Google ads. And there is, there is some information to talk about there. Google ads are very powerful. Their retargeting is really powerful. The display network is super high reaching. Google has way more users than Facebook does as far as reach is concerned. So I'm looking forward to talking about that next week. Less on YouTube, but we know you guys want it. So we're going to bring YouTube, and I'm excited to talk about Google.
Me too. I think I feel the same way.
Yeah. So, but you guys asked for it. We gonna bring it. So thanks so much for joining us this week on Creative Juice. We'll see you next week. See you, Indies.